Just after midnight on the 2nd of January 1968, a red flare went up over Firebase Burt. It meant one thing: get into the bunkers. The guns are about to fire across our own wire. 2,500 Viet Cong had crossed the open ground in 3 waves. They were through the wire now, inside the perimeter, close enough to drop a grenade into a foxhole. And then the Americans lowered their weapons, not to retreat, to fire flat. 11 howitzers dropped their barrels and fired into the assault at point-blank range. 2 M42 Dusters opened up, and along the perimeter, 4 50-caliber machine guns bolted together on a single power turret began to traverse. One gunner that night was missing part of his hand. A survivor lying flat in the dirt beside the turret watched him keep loading, keep firing. The fire passed so close over the infantryman's head that he pressed his face into the ground and waited for it to stop. By dawn, the earth in front of the bunkers was stacked with the dead. 23 Americans were killed at Firebase Burt. The Viet Cong left somewhere between 348 and 401 bodies behind, a kill ratio of roughly 15-1. Some of the men who fought there believed the real number was higher because bodies were dragged away in the dark. This is the story of the weapon they called the meat chopper, and why, after nights like this one, the enemy stopped throwing regiments at American fire bases. The weapon had no business being there. It was built to shoot down airplanes. In 1942, the W.L. Maxon Corporation of New York designed a turret called the M45 Quadmount. 4 Browning M2 heavy barrel machine guns, 50 caliber, mounted in pairs on either side of an open, electrically powered turret. One gunner sat in the center, 2 control handles, a reflex sight the crews called the spiderweb. Behind him, 2 loaders worked the ammunition cans, because 4 guns ran through belts faster than one man could ever feed them. A single Browning fired around 450 to 550 rounds a minute, too slow to reliably catch a fast aircraft, so Maxon massed 4 of them on one mount that could swing a full 360 degrees and elevate to 90. Combined, the 4 guns threw more than 2,300 rounds a minute. The gunner could tune all 4 to converge on a single point. The idea was simple: volume. In Europe, it defended the Rhine bridges and fought through the Battle of the Bulge. But with Allied air supremacy, there were few enemy planes left to shoot, so the gunners turned the barrels down. Against infantry in the open, the effect earned it a name: the meat chopper. By Vietnam, the famous half-track version was gone, retired in 1958. What arrived in country was the M45, the same 4-gun turret mounted on a single-axle trailer or bolted straight into the bed of a 2.5-ton truck. The North Vietnamese had almost no aircraft to speak of, so once again, an anti-aircraft gun became an anti-personnel weapon. Each gun fed from a 200-round can. Effective range, about 2,500 yards. It could blanket an area half a mile across. The crews alternated the upper and lower pairs of guns to keep the barrels from melting, because firing all 4 without pause would cook them. The men who used it loved it. The men on the receiving end gave it a name too: Whispering Death. Before it ever reached a firebase, the Quad-50 earned that reputation on the roads. On Route 19, climbing from the coast up to Pleiku, convoys ran a gauntlet the drivers called Ambush Alley, the same stretch of pass where the French Mobile Group 100 had been destroyed in 1954. Quad-50s rode escort there, bolted into the beds of trucks, and when an ambush opened up, a single mount could hose the entire kill zone from end to end. The enemy adapted. Ambushers learned to hit the lead vehicle first and to avoid the stretches of road where the gun trucks traveled. A weapon that could turn a kilometer of jungle into a wall of fire was a weapon you planned around. That was the lesson the Army carried into War Zone C. By late 1967, the American war ran on fire support bases. These were not permanent forts. They were temporary artillery positions, often laid out in a star shape, dropped into remote jungle to put howitzers within range of contested ground. A firebase could be only days old. Hasty bunkers. Fields of fire still being cut from the tree line. That was the weakness, and the enemy understood it perfectly. Northern Tay Ninh province was War Zone C. It held the largest Viet Cong and North Vietnamese base areas in the region, backed against the Cambodian border and the sanctuaries the Americans were forbidden to enter. Dense, triple canopy jungle. Ideal cover for an army that preferred to mass in the dark. The tactic was the human wave. A regiment would accept the losses needed to breach the wire and get bodies inside the perimeter, where American artillery and air support became too dangerous to use without killing your own men. Rifles, machine guns, and claymores could simply be swamped by numbers at night. They had already proven it. In March of 1967, at a firebase called Gold near Soi Tre, the 272nd Viet Cong Regiment overran part of the perimeter after a barrage of roughly 650 mortar rounds. The defenders broke them with leveled howitzers, flechette rounds, and a column of mechanized infantry that smashed in from the flank. 647 Viet Cong died there. The Americans lost around 30. Both sides filed away the lesson. So when the Army built Firebase Burt in late December, about 7 miles from the Cambodian border, in the shadow of the Black Virgin Mountain, roughly 90 kilometers northwest of Saigon, it was placed deliberately, astride the trail network, as bait. The answer to the human wave was flat trajectory firepower at point-blank range, beehive rounds packed with thousands of steel flechettes, fired from howitzers aimed level, the M42 Dusters and their twin 40mm cannon, and the Quad-50s, whose heavy rounds punched through the jungle foliage that would have prematurely detonated the Dusters' more sensitive shells. The two weapons covered each other's weaknesses. Firebase Burt was about 1 kilometer wide and 500 meters deep, with a road running through the middle of it. The 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, held roughly 40 bunkers on the eastern half. The 2nd Battalion, mechanized, 22nd Infantry, set its armored personnel carriers hull down on the west. 11 105mm howitzers, 5 self-propelled 155mm guns, 2 Dusters, 2 Quad-50s, crewed by Battery D, 71st Artillery. A New Year's truce was in effect, urged by Pope Paul VI. On New Year's Day, the men sat and opened Christmas mail that had only just arrived. But the night before, a listening post had reported movement in the dark, and a morning sweep turned up 2 dead Viet Cong. One was an officer. He carried a Russian-made pistol and firing tables for an 82mm mortar. It was a reconnaissance party. Someone was measuring the ground for an attack. In the early evening of the 1st of January, an ambush patrol 200 meters outside the wire was hit. 2 men killed. Around 8 o'clock, 15 mortar rounds fell inside the perimeter, a ranging shot. At 23:30 hours, the real barrage began. Roughly 200 mortar rounds dropped in 15 minutes. Then they came. 1 minute past midnight, the main assault opened from the north. 2,500 men of the 271st and 272nd Regiments, the Viet Cong 9th Division, pushing down both sides of the road. The heaviest weight came down the west side, into the mechanized battalion, and a single platoon dug in beside it. At the same time, rocket-propelled grenades, machine guns, and small arms tore in from the south along the road. They came in 3 waves. They crawled forward in the roadside ditches. They breached the wire in several places at once. A forward ambush patrol from Company C was overrun in the first minutes. Of 16 men, only a handful walked back unhurt. Rocket grenades found their targets inside the perimeter. One knocked out an armored personnel carrier. Another killed one of the 2 Dusters. One reconnaissance track sergeant took 2 RPG hits on his vehicle and survived both. This was the moment the firebase had been built to survive. The artillerymen lowered their howitzers and fired beehive directly into the advancing masses. Thousands of steel darts at a time, scything through men in the open. When the beehive ran out, they loaded high explosive at the lowest powder charge and kept firing at point-blank range. The big 155mm guns fired straight across the front of Company A. The surviving Duster opened up, and the Quad-50s poured grazing fire across the gaps in the wire, sweeping back and forth at waist height. When the red flare went up, the infantry dropped into their holes, and the guns raked across their own perimeter, clearing the men who had gotten inside it. This is where the wounded gunner kept firing with part of his hand gone. The survivor beside him remembered the flechettes and the small arms fire passing so low overhead that he could do nothing but roll against the ground and hold on. Overhead, an AC-47 gunship the men called Spooky circled, dropping flares and firing its miniguns. Every 5th round a tracer. One veteran said it looked like streams of blood coming down out of the sky. Napalm and cluster munitions were placed within about 50 meters of friendly positions, close enough that a short round would have killed Americans. Across the night, 28 airstrikes were flown. The Viet Cong began to break around 5 in the morning, leaving their dead and their wounded in the wire. By 6:30, only sniper fire remained. At first light, the 3rd Battalion swept its own sector and counted 105 enemy dead in front of its lines alone. The full counts climbed from 348 toward 401. The U.S. Army Center of Military History records 379 killed and 8 captured. The Americans had lost 23 men, with roughly 150 wounded. The firebase was staying in place, so the bodies stayed too. Hundreds of them, decomposing in the heat, were eventually bulldozed into mass graves. One of the infantrymen who lived through that night was a young soldier named Oliver Stone. He fought there with Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 22nd Infantry. Years later, he became convinced he might have imagined the whole thing because the New Year's attack had drawn almost no press coverage back home, until other veterans of the 25th Division confirmed it had happened exactly as he remembered. He made that night the climax of his film, Platoon. The mass graves at the end of the movie are Burt. Now, the title of this video makes a promise. Why the Viet Cong never attacked again. Here is the honest version. There is no captured order, no single document where an enemy commander writes down the words, "Avoid the Quad-50." That story would be cleaner. It would also be invented. What is real is the arithmetic. Burt, Soi Tre.
Firebase after firebase, where a regiment walked into leveled artillery, massed 50 caliber fire, and gunships overhead, and left hundreds of dead in the wire for a handful of American losses. Over time, that arithmetic changed how the enemy fought. The costly mass assault on a firepower-heavy firebase became a losing trade, and they increasingly stopped making it. The Quad-50 did not win that argument by itself, but it was one of the loudest voices in it. The weapon was already obsolete that night. It overheated. It devoured ammunition faster than men could carry it, every gun demanding its own loader. Its open turret left the crew exposed to shrapnel, snipers, and sappers, and a gun that lit up the dark became the first thing the enemy tried to silence. Within a few years it was gone, replaced by the 20mm Vulcan, a 6-barreled Gatling gun firing 3,000 rounds a minute. But for one night, on the 2nd of January 1968, 4 old machine guns bolted to a single turret did exactly what they were built to do, 30 years and 1 ocean away from where the design began. They were made to reach into the sky. By the time it mattered most, the meat chopper had learned to fire flat. And the thing it killed was the oldest idea on any battlefield, that numbers, by themselves, are enough.